a tremendous curriculum has actually been developed and, as I said, is being implemented. But despite that, this government that we have in charge of the country right now decided nonetheless and put about an incredible degree of misinformation about the need for curriculum reform, curriculum review. And tonight I want to particularly direct my remarks to the arts curriculum as it was reviewed in the Donnelly-Wiltshire Curriculum Review. And I urge those listening to join with me as an Australian who believes in the power of education for our young people to wholeheartedly reject the nonsense that is the Donnelly and Wiltshire Curriculum Review. And I do this because I have the deepest respect for our teachers in our classroom and for the students for whom they care. And I reject this review because I know from my own experience as a teacher that what learners need in the classroom is not the top-down didactic lecturing, throwing information into the top of kids' heads, that old model of learning that's so often spoken about in the papers. Young people in a technology-rich world still need to learn basics, but they can interact with learning them in such an interesting range of ways, and powerful learning comes out of making sure that learners are engaged. In terms of attention theory for learning, if we don't get students actually attending to the learning, their brains don't get into gear well enough for them to be able to connect and synthesise the new information that teachers are absolutely responsible for putting in front of those children. What students really need is to be excited by learning and to have a deep connection and a deep understanding and a deep respect for their own identities and cultures and lives, and great learning that's differentiated and different in every context and different for every child becomes possible when you attend to the reality that we're teaching individuals. Yes, we teach subjects to individuals, but we've always got to be mindful that children's success is at the heart of good teaching. Too often, teaching is characterised as somebody standing at the front talking at people. Well, you can talk at people all you like, and the Deputy President will be well aware of that from sitting in the chair and the experience he's having right now. It doesn't mean that people are paying attention, and it doesn't mean that they're going to recall what you say. So there can be a very big gap between that delivery of information and the real act of teaching, which is making learning happen. And people have been talking about this for a very long time. As long ago as 1969, there was a futuristic book called The School That I'd Like, and in it a student who was 16 years old named Linda explained, "The mind is forced to be filled with disjointed bits of knowledge which are reeled off in exams. It's very rare that anyone needs this complete knowledge stored away, for they can, if they need, look it up in a book." Well, with our mobile phones at hand everywhere we go, we can very, very quickly access information. But a quality education in the 21st century is about what you do with that information, and a sort of synthetic thinking that's required to respond to a complex and increasingly complex world means that dumping information into kids' heads, getting them to spit it back at you, can only lead to a very low level of engagement and a very low level of learning. It's part of the journey, but it's not the end game. We need to do much more than that. We need to have children who appreciate learning, who believe in their capacity to learn, and how to enjoy the beauty of our cultural complexity in all its forms, in the arts, in music and dance, in drama. And indeed, there are now, having worked very, very closely together, a compilation of the arts together. 5 subjects have broken down the language barriers between them to make the curriculum so much easier for teachers to access. And they've connected up the subjects of dance, drama, media arts, music and visual arts. This curriculum was endorsed by ministers from around the country in July 2013 and is now being used across the country in a range of states. The arts curriculum is particularly important, and I know that we really need to think about how we make sure that that remains a part of what we do. We know that ACARA, and in fact most stakeholders in the area of education, acknowledge the robustness of this new Australian curriculum. However, what we've seen with the Donnelly-Wiltshire review is that the government really did seek in that document to implement a deeply ideological and a profoundly restricted and poorly executed reignition of the culture wars. From the outset, the review was clearly loaded with baseless declarations, saying, for example, and I quote, "For too long, curriculum development in Australia has been left in the hands of the educators rather than subject specialists." Well, it's simply not correct. Simply not correct. These assertions were baseless, and the incredible waste and hype of going through this curriculum review exercise shouldn't be lost, and that's why I really wanted to speak to it this evening. The flawed logic of this review is exemplified in the call for less content in the arts curriculum, which is an idea incompatible with the review statement, and currently the curriculum seems too pedagogical. And yet there's a concomitant reduction in the allocation of time for the arts. Perhaps we should consider not whether we're teaching too much, but whether we're not providing enough time to learn something that is deeply valuable, deeply engaging and complex, and deeply human. And in that same book that I quoted from a little earlier, as early as 1969, that's The School That I'd Like, there's a quote from a 17-year-old boy who says, "What I feel many of our students want to articulate. I'd like to see the barriers around art, music, literature, drama and drama broken down. I would like to see these forms of self-expression to be understood and enjoyed by all, not just a bourgeois minority. This is where I feel that my education fell through." And the reason that this is so important is because research, pedagogical research in particular, shows us the value of integrated and interrelated knowledge. And they resonate with parents and teachers and groups like the National Advocates for Art Education, who tell us that separate and siloed subject areas are more difficult for primary teachers to facilitate in the classroom. Powerful words like we heard from that 17-year-old resonate because we all know deep down the value of the diverse and colourful tapestry of human knowledge and culture, that through diversity we learn, we grow, and our imaginations are freed. And a capacity to respond to the challenges of the fast-moving century that we're a part of is absolutely vital. And it's in the arts that we see some of the most powerful imaginings of young people. Just recently at the Sydney Opera House, Ben Folds said of the Sydney Symphony Orchestra that theirs is the greatest art because it's an expression of the best of civilisation and our strive to achieve harmony. Sadly, those opposite think that rather than strive for a rich cultural experience, one that recognises the value of our artistic expression, they say, let's chop it all out because it's just too hard to implement. And who cares about the arts anyway? And it might cost us some money to do that. Well, I don't think the government's view on this is the one that resonates with Australians. We love our music in all its glorious forms. And we need to make sure that our children have access to it, to understand it, to do it, to make it, to experience it. And many millions of parents care about not just the arts for art's sake, they actually care about the intellectual growth that is enabled by creative expression in their children. We really need to remember that thousands of Australian teachers too care about that deep understanding and pedagogical value of arts in their classrooms. If we don't provide opportunities for young people who are wonderfully gifted in the arts to enjoy school through the expression of the arts, then we really force them into a servitude of attending a place where they will so often fail in subjects that simply don't engage them. You know, to help somebody learn to read who doesn't really like the act of reading but absolutely loves singing is a great way for a young person to be engaged, to get that attention that's necessary for them to engage in the complex cognitive task of learning to read. When we cut out music because it's too hard and too expensive, we take away that opportunity to learn in a particular way from some of our students. We know that education in the arts can be absolutely transformative. We need only look at Kate Blanchett's recent remarks at Gough Whitlam's memorial to see what Australian students can actually aspire towards. Kate, on that occasion, used her address to really help us remember that. And I think they capture, in her beautiful words, the value of the arts in our schools. And it's quite a profound comment. I quote Kate Blanchard here saying, "In any civilised community, the arts and associated amenities must occupy a central place. Their enjoyment should not be seen as remote from everyday life. Of all the objectives of my government, none had a higher priority than the encouragement of the arts, the preservation and enrichment of our cultural and intellectual heritage. Indeed, I would argue that all other objectives of a Labor government, social reform, justice and equity in the provision of welfare services and educational opportunities, have as their goal the creation of a society in which the arts and the appreciation of spiritual and intellectual values can flourish. Our other objectives are all means to an end. The enjoyment of the arts is an end in itself." And in the 2 minutes that remain here for me this evening in the chamber, Deputy President, I'd like to just recall for you my experience of being at an event on the weekend on the Central Coast in the great suburb of Woy Woy, put together by Coast Community Connections. It was called Discobility, and it was, I think, the third or fourth time in which a gathering of young people with disabilities of an enormous range and their carers and the local community gathered to express joy. You can actually imagine the disco ball hanging from the ceiling in the middle of the day. But it was just absolutely wonderful. The way that it was set up, there were a number of different zones. There was a quiet zone for people who felt a little overwhelmed by the action and movement to go and have a bit of a quiet time. In there they were playing a few quiet games. But there were also a drumming circle that was provided by the Rhythm Hut. There were open mic performances in the acoustic corner. In the middle of the hall at Boogie Central, can I tell you about the wonderful, wonderful young man who's very visually impaired by the name of Ty McGill, who had the place absolutely rocking as he sang. I had the privilege of introducing him, and I said to him, "Ty, what are you going to sing?" And he says, "You'll just have to hang around and see." Just a wonderful man with great confidence, whose expression of joy in living came through his capacity to sing and to show his knowledge and learning in that way, and absolutely to share that with others. There was a workshop haven. There was a wonderful barbecue put on by the local Rotary, and I want to congratulate the sponsors, Bendigo Bank, Northcote, the Rhythm Hut, Rotary and Central Coast Community Connections. A celebration of the arts. We should never, ever sell it short.